connecting information. Our final session today will be Connecting Information Literacy and Experiential Learning for Business. Our presenter will be Alan Witt, and Alan is the Research Instruction Librarian at SUNY Geneseo. And I will be monitoring questions in the chat, and we're going to answer questions as time permits in between the sessions. So welcome, Alan. Thanks for being here, and thank you all for being here today.
Hi, it's good to be here. So I have this anticipatory set up, and I put the link in the chat. So please fill that out as you have a moment, and we will return to those answers later in the discussion. I apologize in advance for any coughing fits. I came down with a cold. I took the COVID test and it was negative, but it always leaves me with a cough for weeks. So again, apologies in advance. So this session is Connecting Information Literacy and Experiential Learning for Business. I'm particularly focusing on the actual connecting the concepts to experiential learning, more so than creating the experiential learning opportunities. So this is more about justifying these sessions for administrators and basically making the rationale for how these things are actually connected in case one is challenged. I noticed one of the responses on the Padlet was pushback from senior librarians. So this can be a means of selling these both internally to your own faculty in your own department, to administrators, to tenure boards, really anyone, and also making a legitimate connection between what we do in more creative or non-traditional spaces and kind of the traditional metrics that we use to say this is a legitimate part of our jobs. So I would like to start with a land activism opportunity, which from my UUP activism, I found a call to action always works better. So if you're interested in pursuing meaningful action in regards to the appropriation of land from Native American tribes or indigenous groups, I would recommend researching the original residents, owners, and land institution is on, and then using that information to push your institution, or in the case of, say, ACRL, ALA, conference planning committees, to contact representatives of the groups and ask those groups what they would like to see in terms of meaningful action. My version of that has been, we're on ancestral Seneca lands, and I'm working with a local professor of Native American Studies to see what those local groups would like institutions and conferences to do, which I feel would be a good practical step. So one possible approach that I've really liked is Real Rent Duwamish, which is a website based in Seattle that effectively allows groups to pay rent. If they're holding a conference on those lands, if they own property on those lands, it's essentially click a button, send rent directly to the tribe. I don't know what opportunities there are for my local tribes for that, which is why I'm investigating to find out. It's a practical step that's fairly easy, especially if you're pushing the institution, which really should be doing this to do the legwork. So I wanted to put that opportunity out for everyone. On to the presentation. This session's goals are to go over the context of what I put together, because that lets you know whether it's reproducible or not. Go over the actual escape room activity. I'll have another back channel Padlet that you can work on that will show how lessons you have managed to do have been connected to the frames, which we can use to talk about this later. We'll talk about how to connect lessons like these to mission, vision, frameworks, and if we have time, do some workshopping on how to address the challenges that you've put forward in the Padlet. So starting out my context, I'm a faculty tenure track librarian. I work with business history and political science and international relations. And I'm at the State University of Geneseo, which is public, 4-year, mostly undergraduate. We have some graduate programs that I've worked with, but primarily undergraduate. And we are a unionized environment. So in terms of the context I'm working in, that means I have a lot more freedom to pursue my own course of instruction. And the main pushback would be what counts towards tenure. Personally, I'm in a very supportive department, so we're also granted a lot of latitude within our department and within our library to justify what counts as progress towards tenure, which is definitely a form of privilege. But part of what we do is thinking of ways in which this connects to our own mission and vision whenever we're doing something, and that can be an individual method as to how we can make sure we're advancing the goals of our institution when we do something. So the actual experience that I put together was Daniel Bennett of the Internship Opportunity. Was adapted from a previous thing called The Disappearance of Daniel Bennett, and as an homage to the original experience, which was designed by a group of librarians from multiple institutions as an information literacy escape room. I've included the name and the character Daniel Bennett in every one I've adapted. I've made a couple of different varieties, but the core of the experience is always multimedia, designed with both physical and digital elements, and scopes out to a target group of 4 to 6 students and ideally multiple groups in any given session. The actual lesson is I set up a fantasy framework, which is security companies interviewing students in an honor class at a business school for a set of paid internships. And completing the exercise is the entry ticket to who gets first crack at the internships. All fake, but it provides kind of an intrinsic motivation for the competition. We give no hints, which is unusual for escape rooms, but we found that they interrupted the experience. So we got rid of hints. We put a couple of points on the pointers on the board based on pain points we've seen students get in previous run-throughs, mostly things that are like get more eyes on the subject, collaboration is key, semi-cryptic, but the idea is each point we put up comes from a sticking point we saw from multiple groups. The students find answers to a series of Google forms using various web and physical elements and clues. We have a fake Twitter feed, a fake corporate website, a couple of Google forms, and then some handouts, which are in the materials that I'll provide at the end of the presentation, all of which interflow and interact, that the students can work with them with multiple people working on different tracks simultaneously. And we follow up the lesson with individual assessments at the end, followed by a group discussion going specifically over teamwork. So in pitching this, I was working with a previous version of the experience that I'd built as a team building exercise for our CIT department. And I made the pitch to a faculty member of the School of Business as part of my outreach strategy to build instruction. And I targeted her class because she was teaching organizational dynamics, and I was using this as a team building exercise. So I felt there was a intrinsic connection there that we could build on. She liked what I had to say, which was basically, I think I can support your class and your educational goals here. Here is this thing I've produced. Let's sit down and talk about whether it might be useful and how we could adapt it. And the outcome of that discussion was developing a new version of the escape room in concert with her to meet her specific educational goals, which were essentially developing better team dynamics and understanding of how team dynamics help the completion of tasks as part of her overall teaching. And then we also developed an assessment tool, minor questionnaire basically, with the goal of co-publishing article on the subject. Morphed into 2 articles. We're collecting more data in service of that. So that is essentially the shape of the experience. I wanted to take a quick stop here to see if there were any questions. While we're doing any questions, I also have a separate back channel that I will toss up here. This link is basically going over those of you who have done experiential learning or non-traditional assessments and how you connected them to the ACRL frameworks, if you did, or any connections that you see. I wanted to pause here and see if anyone had any questions so far on the lesson plan that I put together or the pitch I made. All right. I'm seeing no questions so far. So in that case, I will hop on to the next part of the presentation. But again, if you've done any non-traditional lesson plans that you made concrete connections to the frameworks or want to brainstorm any, there's a second back channel there that will be connecting the two Padlets to discuss strategies later on. So moving on. So when I thought about how I would connect this work, because I've been doing a lot of work on these escape rooms, and something I wanted to be prepared for in case administrators came asking, how does this connect with your job? And both for my write-ups. I'm going up for tenure next semester, and this is something I wanted to feature. And if I'm going to be boasting about it in my packet, I want to be able to concretely tie it to my job in order to make sure that it counts. So I started by looking at the mission and vision. We actually have a separate mission and vision for the library when I was involved in creating, so I always like showing them off. But starting to look at that, the mission and vision doesn't connect too closely to anything I did in this particular instance. The closest I had was providing a place for innovation and creativity in the library vision, which I feel is a reasonable connection, but it's a bit abstract and not one that I'd want to rely on if I were to pitch this to higher ups or fellow librarians or anyone else really. So the next step I took is looking at the institutional mission and vision, where I found more grist for the mill. And our institutional mission looks at cultivating creativity, engagement, and discovery, all three of which are factors you need both in creating and definitely in working through escape rooms. So that would be the first place I would start, because ultimately any academic library, while we have our own focuses, the main focus is supporting the parent institution's mission and vision. So that's always a good place to go, at least when you're talking to administrators in justifying anything you do. Unless they don't take their mission and vision seriously, which can happen, but it still is a good thing to touch on whenever you are connecting what you do to the larger purpose. Likewise, there's a specific call out for creativity in the institutional vision, which again talks about intellectual curiosity and problem solving, both of which are important for escape rooms. So I felt that these would be major touchstones when I write up this lesson plan in particular as an example of excellence in my duties. I also looked at the ACRL frameworks in terms of connecting these to broader library practice. And the two that I came up with where there were the most connections were more in the descriptive elements of what does this look like in practice near the bottom of each framework in the document. For research's inquiry, the practice of that looks at new investigative methods, persistence and adaptability, multiple perspectives during information gathering, and seeking appropriate help. The spirit of those is really more in terms of broad research and publishing and trying new things in the service of peer-reviewed work and whatnot. But those are also principles and a mindset that are integral to escape rooms and these escape experiences, where you have to provide material to different people in your group and see if different people come with different solutions, try different things, persist in trying new things and not giving up. So I felt that this lesson plan worked in inculcating a mindset that could be tapped into when teaching research skills. Similarly, searching and strategic exploration, which is always my go-to in the frameworks. Scope control and matching information needs to search strategies is crucial when you're figuring out, okay, what kind of things could we use to answer this particular question. Mental flexibility and creativity, again, persistence in the face of challenges, trying different strategies when they don't work out. All these are useful in solving puzzles and thus a mindset that a lesson like this can allow students to essentially wallow in, which can then be tied later to other lessons, or can just be something that gets people into a mindset at least once that will help research skills in the future. So in terms of what this looks like in practice, a pitch to library administrators, would point specifically to this supports our institutional goals in the following specific ways. And essentially it's information literacy in action. It's active learning using information literacy skills and mindsets. It's not teaching research specifically, but it supports faculty instruction, which is part of the institutional mission, while at the same time getting students to be in a mindset that is also conducive to research. If I'm talking to to faculty and making a pitch for here's why you should use this kind of creative lesson planning, I would just go straight to here's how it supports what you're trying to do, which usually entails gain hold of their syllabi first, or at least gain an understanding of what they're teaching. And that in turn usually requires a one-on-one discussion. So this is not necessarily a thing you can use in setting up an initial relationship, but I found once you have a pre-existing relationship with a faculty member and are a known quantity, then you can set up a let's meet for 30 minutes and have that discussion about what are you teaching, what are your goals, what are you trying to get the students to learn, here's how this thing I've produced or this thing I can do might help you with those goals. Should we work on this? And that helps get over that initial barrier to trying creative things if you can directly tie it to something they're already trying to do. And to library faculty, I would talk specifically about the ACRL frameworks and the whole concept of letting people wallow in a mindset. Because ultimately, if you're supporting the faculty in their instruction and setting up those relationships, that gives you a platform to push later research classes. And also helps your statistics for instruction. So if that is a focus, this is a good way to do that. So again, I'd like to pause for any questions about outreach methods, making elevator pitches, that sort of thing. So I see Chelsea, sorry if I'm butchering your name, has a question. At our institution, do we need to have a lesson plan approved beforehand, or do we have the ability to implement as you see fit? So for the library, because we're doing one-shots, we don't have pre-approval. And this is where the context comes in. This sort of thing gets a lot harder when you have extra levels of pre-approval. I basically have carte blanche to create a lesson plan. Depending on the faculty member in question I was working with, they might want to see it beforehand. We've built up enough of a reputation that a lot of my faculty will just say, here's a course period, do what we want with that, which again, makes this sort of thing harder because there's lots of extra steps you have to go through. If you're doing pre-approval, then you have to figure out what the pre-approvers are looking for and cater to their specific concerns in your pitch. Any other questions? All righty. We will continue moving on. Please feel free to toss questions in the chat as you go. And we'll address them also at the end of the presentation. But on to the next. So I have a workshop set up. Essentially, the idea here is to use the challenges that people have put down in the initial Padlet. And I'll put both of these back in the chat as well for convenience. But the goal here essentially is to look at the problems people have faced and the connections people made to the frameworks, and brainstorm potential ways to get past those challenges. So I'm going to toss this in the chat and then set up breakout rooms for probably about, let's say we're doing well on time, 5 to 10 minutes, depending on if people are going back into the main room. And then we will discuss potential solutions from people who are willing to report out in their groups. So let me set up a number of rooms. So does anyone want to share some of what they talked about in terms of working through some of the obstacles that were presented on the initial Padlet that we talked about? Feel free to unmute and
one of the things that is that pushback that we don't even have time for you to come into the classroom. And so they created a guide just for that class. And I said, keep those counts of the guide and then give it back to the faculty and to the library administrations that say this is an asynchronous encounter, because the faculty need to know that the students need the help.
Ooh, that's a good idea. I haven't done enough with the LibGuides statistics. They keep so much information. That sounds like a great idea. Cool. Thank you, Jennifer. Anyone else come with some cool ideas to move through some of the pushback?
Hello. Sorry, I'm in a shared office. In our group, we talked about the issue of the paint by numbers instruction. And so somebody in our group talked about having a summit with faculty, especially adjunct faculty, somewhere at the start of the semester, to do a library introduction and say, here's what we have to offer, and we'd love to come into your classes, either asynchronously or in person.
Yeah, that sounds like a wonderful idea. I've found a lot of faculty have told me in some of my sessions that they were not even aware. I think the previous session was talking about a lot of faculty just weren't aware of the services we have to offer, and that includes instructional and different methodologies. So personally, I've had a lot more luck with new faculty if I can get them right when they come in and are looking for help. They're usually easy to sell on, hey, I have all this assistance I can offer you. They can grab on to the lifeline. But it's great for established faculty too, because sometimes you just don't know. You bought a new database and they delete the library email. They might not even know you have a new resource that could really help them and their students. Does anyone else have some ideas that came up in discussion? So one thing I'll share, looking at some of the elements on the Padlet, I'm seeing a bunch of people who said they were unsure where to start with gamification, or didn't feel necessarily comfortable or up with the current things in non-traditional instruction. And one of the things one of the things I found that helped me with that was feeling okay with doing traditional instruction. I've done a couple of gamified lessons, but for a lot of like upper level instruction, here's a database, here's how it works, here's how it fits with your assignment. Now let's go work in that database model. Works better for a lot of the high level stuff. And it fits what the instructors need. It seems to stick in the student's mind really well. So I like the gamified stuff where it's appropriate, but there's kind of a very narrow window, usually with lower level students, where the gamification works better in some ways than the more straightforward lecture. And I usually think of it as the goal is to get the students to be intrinsically motivated. And the higher up the students are, the more intrinsically motivated in their discipline they tend to be, which lessens the need to do stuff like that. So I like to think of it as it's another tool for the toolbox where it's appropriate, it's cool to do, but we don't necessarily need to feel bad about not knowing the tools in it. It's just another area you can learn about and add if necessary, and if it works with your school. Sometimes it doesn't. That was the one I wanted to address specifically. So we can reserve the last 5 minutes for any other questions or ideas people came up with that they wanted to share. This is my contact information. I put together a bit.ly that I'll toss into the chat that has this presentation, as well as links to both the original escape room, which is Creative Commons licensed. Feel free to use it, share it. It has all the setup and where to buy the materials necessary to make it happen. And the escape room that I did, which should be fairly free, except for the need to get manila envelopes and transparencies. But the link is here. All of it's Creative Commons licensed in this presentation. Feel free to use it and or contact me if you want more descriptions, or if you would like me to run you and a group of people through one of these escape rooms. I have online versions. I'd be happy to do that as a consulting thing. I see a question from Jennifer.
Yeah, another question that came up with our group was also, is gamification too stressful and not collaborative after COVID, and that the students kind of are on a little bit edge? Is the gamification good for their mental health to have that stress of getting it done?
So I'm sure this always comes down to the individual context of the institution and the state and where you're at and all that combined. I would say that when done in such a way that it's foregrounding the fun elements, yeah, gamification to me always, I build a lot of my stuff on Thomas Malone's research on intrinsic motivation and educational gaming. And he put a lot of thought into, and this is old research, I think the early aughts, but a lot of good stuff. And he really went into why educational gaming can work. And a large element of it was that sense of escape from reality, going into a fantasy scenario where it's not you, it's student at this institution. And I found that particular element, that taking you out of yourself into a fantasy framework, removes a lot of the stress, because there's no consequence for failure. It's a fake competition and everyone knows it, but it's still a competition that has a fun element of, ooh, my fake character wins this. It's a role-playing principle from all the live action role-playing in D&D I do and did. And that element of being someone other than yourself while you're doing the game is really a stress reliever, while still being able to get educational content across. So as long as you aren't tying that particular game to actual grades, I feel that with the fantasy element, not like necessarily elves and gnomes, but the element of being someone other than yourself, it can actually address that problem. That's my thought on it anyhow. That's a great question. And yeah, I tamp down on the competitive elements of it. When possible, a little bit is good. Too much definitely would add to the stress. Any other questions?
There's a question in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think really any different pedagogies, when they fit the information needs, would be appropriate. And again, the same principle applies to pitching them. Problem-based learning, I think, would be a bit easier to sell in some contexts. I've done some things where I throw students in a number of databases and have them create a guide to how to use it as each group, and then present to the group as a whole and have that as a resource for students going forward. Not really gamified, but the same principle applies when you're trying to justify it, is saying, here's how it fits the institutional goals, here's how it fits your specific educational goals. Here's the benefits that we've seen. And I feel those are both really good methods that have proven there's research on how they work that can be pointed to very straightforwardly say this works, and here's why, and here's how it fits this particular need. So I would do that same approach. It's basically just seeing the connections to whatever thing the person you're pitching to cares about, and drawing those connections explicitly. But especially problem-based learning, I love that. Even case studies essentially are fantastic in business school, and there's a lot of ways you can. A case study is essentially a fantasy scenario you're putting people on. The gamification of that can be pretty easy because you're starting from a framework that you can play with. Hopefully that answers the question, or at least gives my opinion on it anyhow. Do you have any other questions? I think we're over time technically, but this is the last presentation of the day, and I have the time booked off. So I'm willing to stay on afterwards if we want to end the official presentation in case anyone has any other questions.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, I'd just like to formally end day one of our fall brass symposium fall 2021. Thank you, Alan. Let's all give Alan a hand.